Calliope's Tale by FalcomReynolds. Chapter 2, Heart's Gold, Part 1. They'd had to swing the ship broadside to the beach to pin the monster in the lagoon, and they fought them viciously. There were deep gouges in the hull where its claws had raked across the dark wood. Crew members in the hold were still desperately patching the holes to prevent the ship from taking on any more water. Previously, the lagoon had been a clear, brilliant blue. Now it was stained dark with black blood that swirled like ink through the lapping waves. The monster was floating in the center of the cove, dark coils limp. Its slick, smooth body looped around itself. Now that it wasn't so bunched up, it was easy to tell how large it was. Probably longer than the ship in its entirety. From the smooth, deep brown skin of the face and head under a mop of black hair, and spiked webbing to the tip of the long, sinuous tail, the Mermaid was all muscle. It had been a swift, sleek creature, able to wedge its 2-inch talons into the cracks between the hull planks and tear at them. Now, its wet body was punctured with bullet wounds and slashes from swords or bayonets. Ianthe leaned on the railing of the midnight sun, musket beside her, and let out a small breath. They'd seen the Mermaid while circling the island. It had been blocking their access to the clear freshwater stream that fed into the sea. They'd gone around, trying to find another creek, but scouted no other sources. Strangely, the Mermaid hadn't fled before the ship as they normally did. This one guarded the cove. They tried to reason with it, calling that they needed to enter the cove, offering food or treasures, but it hadn't listened. They'd had no choice but to try and sail past it, and when they did, it had attacked. Ianthe shook her head. They would burn the corpse once they'd hauled it out of the water and onto the beach and dried it as much as they could. Or, if Captain Maculo said, they'd leave it out to sea to be eaten by scavengers. Whatever they did, it still filled Ianthe with a sickened displeasure. She didn't like the whole matter. It was a damn shame to kill something just because it was in the way. She looked over the body. It was easy to tell now that it wasn't moving around that it was a mermaid, a female of the species. She wondered what it had been doing here, at such a large size. Wouldn't it have gone further out into the ocean by now, to grow? Someone below, in the boats towing the corpse to shore, shouted, "Maid Ianthe!" Ianthe glanced over. "There's something down here, in the water." The crewman, a wiry and excitable man called Leng, was leaning far enough over the edge of the boat to set it rocking dangerously. "Is there? What is it?" "Yes!" He peered into the water. "Not a stone or a piece of coral." "So what is it?" In response, Leng dove into the water. The other crew member in the boat flailed to keep the boat afloat. Ianthe winced. This was going to bite Leng later, when he was trying to wash the mildly toxic Mermaid blood out of his eyes and clothing. Leng's lithe form powered down to the sandy cove bed. Ianthe watched him circle around a darker spot on the white sand. He was right. There was something down there. After several attempts to move whatever it was, he shot back to the surface and gasped, spitting out water. "It's a chest!" he called, gesturing down. He squinted, eyes flooded with bloodied seawater. "Treasure or something, I think. A cache, maybe." Ah, that explained a lot. The Mermaid could have fled the lagoon if it had chosen to dive beneath the boat, but it hadn't. It had stubbornly stayed and hissed at them in its strange pseudo-language and fought them and died. Now she knew it was because it had something to protect, something it didn't want them to have. Well, they might as well get it. "Go ahead," Ianthe called down. "Get someone else and retrieve it, if you can. We'll open it on shore." It took 4 of the strongest crew to dig the chest out of the sand and drag it to the shore, over the white seabed. It was too heavy to float. Ianthe thought that perhaps they'd been lucky, and there'd be gold inside or something else valuable. The task was made all the harder by the blood clouding the water, though by the time they started to try and move the chest in earnest, the tide had shifted, and the water began to wash the blood out of the sea. Resting on the beach, the chest reached Ianthe's waist. She looked it over carefully. "Think it's dangerous," Captain Winthrop Maculo said, standing next to her. I doubt it, she replied, shaking her head. Why would the Mermaid guard something dangerous? To us. Something dangerous to us is likely dangerous to a Mermaid, unless it happens to be a food store, Ianthe said. Mermaids could eat things that would kill humans, like octopuses and cone snails. Fair enough. Makulo stepped forward and reached out, taking hold of the heavy, cracking, sodden leather strap that held the chest shut. He unbuckled it and lifted the lid. Immediately, a wave of seawater poured out, washing over the boots of anyone nearby and soaking into the pale sand. Ianthe and Makulo didn't move, though a few of the other crew members hopped back, startled. After a few moments, the pirates inched forward again, peering into the chest. Ianthe shielded her eyes with her hand and tried to keep the glare off the water so she could see the dark, wavering surface. There was no gleam of gold or shimmer of pearls. Instead, there was a mess of tangled seaweed and a few pieces of colorful coral. Scattered throughout, Ianthe could see the glint of a few silver pieces, but other than that, the chest did not seem to contain anything of value. It was hard to see. Ianthe squinted against the light. Something about this didn't feel right. She gripped her weathered sword hilt with one hand. The waters stirred. There was a moment of panic among the assembled crew, and then a creature surfaced and blinked sleepily in the sunlight. It was a small, almost human figure, dark skin and eyes, plump arms and hands, and fat cheeks. But on its torso were the long, gaping red slits, and where its ears should have been, there were slitted holes surrounded by webbing, and rather than legs, there were instead a long, dark, rubbery skin tail. Ianthe felt her heart go cold in her chest and caught her breath, horror dawning on her. No wonder the mermaid... No, not a mermaid. Matron. No wonder she had fought so hard, tried to stop the ship from entering the lagoon. No wonder she was so large and yet so close to shore, not out in the ocean like most larger mermaids. No wonder she was here instead of out there feasting on fish and plumbing the depths for her ancestors. This chest held no material treasure. It held her child. Several of the crew whispered and warded themselves against evil, though against the creature or against the crime, Ianthe could not tell. Nothing will send us to the bottom of the sea, one of the crew whispered, face pale. We never should have fought her. We never should have come here. We didn't know any better, one of the deckhands hissed back, but it seemed half a plea both to themselves and perhaps to Othu as well. Captain Makulo stared down at the baby Mermaid, eyes cold. Ianthe swallowed hard. She knew that look. He was hiding his uncertainty, but this was when he made his harshest decisions. What do we do? She asked him. Kill it, he said, after a long moment's hesitation. Ianthe stopped, stunned. She fumbled for words. Oh, we can't, she said finally, desperately. We can't. I won't. We won't. The captain's face was hard, but the ice in his eyes was melting already. Ianthe prayed he would relent. There was a long, tense silence, and finally he sighed and looked down. I know. That would be too simple. That would be the easy answer. We can't kill it. We've done enough of that today. Ianthe let out the breath she had been holding. So, what do we do? She asked again. We take it with us, Makulo replied. Bring it on board. The crew members stirred. Ianthe looked down at the mermaid. It didn't know what was happening. It clung to the side of the chest and pushed itself mostly underwater, where its flared gills could breathe. The dark eyes looked over them all, wide and afraid. Does anyone have a problem with that? The captain asked. There was silence. Makulo sighed. Deal with it, he muttered to Ianthe. She nodded and stepped up to the chest, turning to put her back to the baby. The crew wouldn't voice their opinions against Makulo with him here, but with Ianthe they would speak, because she would listen to them and try to understand and address their concerns. That was her job. They would tell her what they really felt about any decisions Makulo made. Another moment of silence as Makulo headed back towards the boats to take them out towards the midnight sun. Ianthe looked over the assembled crew. "Does anyone have any issues with bringing this creature on board?" she asked, slowly and carefully. Another stirring, but now Makulo was gone, and they were more willing to speak. "I do," said one of the hold cannoneers, a burly man called Gunnar. "What do you have to say?" Flat tone, flat stare. Generally, he was rather irreverent, calling the goddesses your gods, keeping himself away from them as if the seas of other countries were ruled by different deities, and Ianthe disliked his audacity. At her tone, he swallowed nervously before continuing. "It ain't natural," he said, frown heavy on his flushed face. "We shouldn't be too close to it. Captain was right. We should kill it." Captain also decided against that plan of action. "We aren't going to," Ianthe said, soft but firm. "We will carry this child on board and keep it with us." "It's wrong," Gunnar argued. He glanced around at the crew members, hoping for support. "It's wrong, ain't it?" Lang, who was studying the sand, looked up. "We need to take it," he said quietly, black eyes more serious than Ianthe had ever seen them. "We did this. It's our responsibility." She could read his expression even through the sheen of dark blood that persisted from his dive into the lagoon waters. It was irritating his eyes, inflaming the edges to a puffy red and scumming the pupils over. But he didn't look like the pain he was suffering was physical. "To keep a monster?" Ianthe looked back at the baby mermaid. It was hiding now, wrapping seaweed around its head and ducking beneath the water. She could see the fuzz on its scalp where black hair was growing. "She's not a monster," she said firmly. "And if you think otherwise, you should stay here on this island and find passage to the next ship." Silence. The island was far enough from any other that it would take days for another ship to reach it, and it wasn't on any normal sailing route. Anyone left here wouldn't see another ship for weeks, perhaps months. "If you stay with the ship and find that you still cannot bear to be around her, you may leave when we next dock. Is that understood?" No one contested her. Ianthe let out a breath and turned back to the crew who had hauled the chest onto the beach. "Get this into a boat," she said, gesturing to the chest. "We're taking her and it with us." "The whole thing?" The nearest crewmate, a powerfully built woman called Aisha, glanced dubiously down at the chest. "Yes, but can't you see she lives there?" Ianthe snapped, cutting her off. Aisha shut her mouth. "Understood," she muttered, and helped bring the mermaid aboard.